My name is Alena Ukrainskaya, and I'm a teacher at Great Education Center and a teacher of children with dyslexia. Just, I would like to check if you hear me well. Please, can you send me plus in our chat box, please?
Yes, everything
just
is
to make sure. Thank you. Yeah, I see already, John. So thank you very much. I ask you to stay muted. Thank you. Thank you for your reaction. I see that everything is fine. So please stay muted, everyone. If you have any questions, please send your questions in our chat box. We'll discuss them during our webinar or right after our webinar. So it's very nice that we have a lot of people. So, okay, let's start because we are running out of time. I will share my presentation with you. Yeah, so we are starting. So I'd like to start our webinar with talking about learning disabilities in general. Just a couple of words about that. I personally do not really like the term disabilities. It doesn't sound really nice for me. I prefer to say learning disorder or learning difference. There are a lot of learning differences and disorders. We are talking about some of them with you today. And let's start to talk about it in general. So what is learning disability or learning disorder? So it's an informational processing problem that prevents actually a person from learning a skill and using it effectively. So the main difference that you should remember and understand that learning disability doesn't mean intellectual disability. And learning disorders generally affect people of average or even higher than average level of intelligence. And actually it's as a result, it appears as a kind of a gap between expected skills that are based on age or level or intelligence, and actually that what we expect from these people. And the main difference that actually the people with dyslexia, they look like perfectly normal, sorry for this word, perfectly normal people, unless they start to speak, not speaking, but writing, reading, and spelling the words. So learning disabilities shouldn't be confused with visual and hearing problems, which are a result of visual and hearing or motor handicaps or emotional disturbance. So again, the main difference between these categories that people with dyslexia are very smart, are very talented, are very intelligent, and they have problems with mainly reading, writing, spelling, and sometimes math. So learning, any learning disability cannot be fixed, cannot be cured. It's unfortunately a lifelong challenge, but with appropriate support, with appropriate accommodation, with intervention, people with dyslexia can achieve high results, and in any spheres, at school, at work, in family, with friends, and in the community in general. Let's move on. So, as I said, we'll talk about different types of learning disabilities, and we are starting with dyslexia, of course. In our previous webinars, we have already had a lot of webinars about dyslexia. I was talking in details about the processes that are happening in our brain. Today, I'm not talking about it. I just like to say that dyslexia, it's not a infection or disease or problem which usually people think about it. It's just a difference It's just a way when people process, analyze, and use the information in a different way. The information is transmitted in our brains from one part of the brain to another part of the brain through some special cells, neurons, and people with dyslexia have a little bit different way how the information is transmitted. So dyslexia. As you see on your screens, it's specific learning disability that actually affects reading. As you may understand, it's not only reading, all related language-based processing skills, yes, so different skills which are based on reading. What are they? It's writing, it's spelling, it's analyzing, so and processing spoken information, of course. As you may understand that it affects not only education, it affects different areas of our life, but again, with support, with accommodation, people can live with dyslexia pretty happy life. Another type of learning disability is dysgraphia. It's another. One more disability, specific disability, which affects handwriting ability and fine motor skills. So dysgraphia interferes with particularly all aspects of writing processing, including spelling, legibility, word processing, word spacing between words, and size of the letters. Children with dyslexia very often do not make any space between words. They can write in one line without any gaps between words. Usually, dysgraphia diagnosed when children start school, at primary school, but if the type or level of dysgraphia and dyslexia is not very high, so not severe dysgraphia, so it can be diagnosed later, even until adulthood. Very often, in 95%, dysgraphia goes together with dyslexia. I have never seen people without dyslexia, so only dysgraphia. So in my practice, I haven't met these people, but my colleagues say that it's possible that a child, usually it's about children, has dysgraphia but doesn't have dysgraphia. I haven't met these people. So in 95, 96%, they go together, these two disabilities. This is the picture of writing of my students with dyslexia and dysgraphia. So please look at these photos. The photo on the left, number 1, a boy, 13-year-old boy wrote it. And on the right, a girl of 13 years old girl wrote these texts. So the level of dysgraphia and dyslexia is different. On the left is a text made by a person with a really severe dyslexia, very difficult to learn, to read, to write, and to spell, as you may see. And on the right, it's a girl with not so severe form of dyslexia. So she tried to write some facts. You may see that it has sense. The sentences are more or less coherent and linked together. So you may try to identify the words. If you look at picture number 1 on the left, can you please send just words or maybe phrases in the chat box? What do you think this boy wanted to write? Maybe a word, maybe a phrase. I mean, which is on the left. What was actually the topic that I asked to write about? Write your ideas and then I will tell you what actually he wanted to say. Free time activity, holidays. I swim in the sea, holidays, free time activities. Yes, Yes, you are right. So I go sailing. That was number one sentence. I go sailing. Swimming in the sea. Yes, swimming sentence. Last sentence, I go to the mountain. Yes, you're absolutely right, Anna. Jumping on the batut. So there was word batut, jumping. You may see how he wrote like in the mirror, yeah, the letter J, and go to the mountains. Yes, you are right, absolutely right. This last word is mountain. So you see that it's like a transcription of words. So they do not have the connection between sounds and letters. So that was very interesting. It can be useful for you to see how dysgraphia looks like, and dyslexia actually as well. Let's move on. One more type of learning disability is dyscalculia. It's one more disability that affects a person's ability to understand numbers and to learn math facts. So, but it's not actually only about calculating itself. People have troubles in different ways. For example, they may struggle with key concepts like bigger and smaller. For them, it's very difficult, not for all of them, for some of them. So simple ways to imagine and to distinguish small and big. For them, it's different if they see number 5 and the number written with letters, like a word 5. They may read but do not relate them to each other. Also, calculation itself, multiplication, tables, times table, very difficult to remember because they also need to use their memory. Estimating time, it's very difficult for them to understand what you mean when you say, for example, hour. They do not understand what 15 minutes actually is. The same I can say about distance. If we say the distance between cities is about 600 kilometers, very difficult for them to imagine what I mean by saying 600 kilometers. Very difficult to count money. In the shop, they struggle with changes. They don't know how to count how much money they must pay. So this is about dyscalculia. It doesn't mean that all people with dyslexia have it. My son, actually, I didn't say at the beginning, I'm a mother of 11-year-old son, a dyslexic son who was diagnosed 4 years ago. So he has dyslexia and dysgraphia, but he doesn't have dyscalculia. Let's move on. One more learning disability, which is really one of the most popular neurologist problem. It's ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it really often goes with dyslexia. Not always, but very often. So please, I ask you to be muted. Stay muted, please. Yeah, thank you. So children with ADHD, so what do they have? They have problems with paying attention. They can't control their behavior. Sometimes they act and then think what they have done. They are very, very active. They speak too much, not just much. It's okay now. Normally, people, I mean, children, they have troubles concentrating. They have troubles focusing on something. Sometimes they behave in one way or another way. But children with ADHD, they do not just grow out of these problems. They still have these problems when they grow up. And of course, it causes some difficulty at school, in family, with friends, with family. So how to identify these children? They daydream a lot. They are very easily distracted. They all the time forget or lose their things. They also may squirm or fidget on the lessons. You mean, so some movements, some face expression, a bit strange and unusual for children. They make very careless mistakes when they write, when they calculate some nonsense. And of course, which can be dangerous, they sometimes take unnecessary risks. So that is common between these, among these people, sorry. What causes ADHD? So what are the problems behind that and how to diagnose that? So scientists are still actually studying the reasons, different factors which cause ADHD. Still, it's a question. Still, they do not have one answer for all these questions. But what they do know is that it has genetic component. It runs in the family. Another reasons for that can be, as you may see on your screen, brain injury, different environmental exposure, alcohol or tobacco use of while pregnancy, period of pregnancy, premature delivery when baby is delivered earlier than it was planned. How to diagnose? Actually, this process deciding if a child has ADHD can be very difficult because ADHD, people with ADHD have some similar symptoms that people with dyslexia have. Very common problems, some of them, not all of them, but many of them. That is why it needs to go through real and serious testing, and it has some stages. So there is no only one test for ADHD. So usually it starts with medical examination. This test includes hearing and visual tests, and also they learn the history of health, of how the child was, what problems and diseases the child had when he was a baby, a young child, and they have a lot of information from teachers, from speech therapists, from psychologists, and from parents, of course, and actually from child as well. And only then scientists or doctors usually, we will talk a little bit later who gives the report about if the child has ADHD or any other learning disability. There are special commission. We will talk a little bit later about it. So let's come back to dyslexia. And let's talk about dyslexia and what causes it. Again, the same situation like with ADHD. The reasons are still not known, all reasons, but the main reason, which scientists know for sure, again, it has genetic component. So if one of the parents in the family has dyslexia, it's about 50% that the child will have dyslexia too. Moreover, if one of children in the family has dyslexia, it's about 75% that his sibling will have dyslexia too. So personally, I know the family with 4 children, 3 of whom have dyslexia, and father of this family is dyslexic. So unfortunately, yes, statistic is not very nice. Let's move on. How widespread is dyslexia? There are different numbers, different scientists. In Ukraine, we do not have any official statistics. Actually, we don't have anything in Ukraine related to dyslexia. American Dyslexic Organization say that about, you may see that 10 to 20% of all population are dyslexic. British scientists say that a little bit less than that, up to 15% of people are dyslexic. Whatever the fact is, number is, I mean, it means that you are teachers, you have students in the class. So at least one or two children with dyslexia you have in your class with different form of dyslexia. They may know it, they may not. Maybe parents don't know, maybe you don't know. Because the types and severity, level of severity, it's different. It goes from subtle form, mild form, like middle form, and severe dyslexia. So a lot of people have dyslexia, and you do have the people, children with dyslexia in your classes. I have now a couple of photos that may kind of represent what dyslexic students see and what they feel when they read. I have two slides to show you. You may try to read something, maybe to identify the text. You may guess. You may try actually to, you know the language well. So imagine the child who doesn't speak English well. The second slide I will show also with different forms of dyslexia, it looks like that. And now I'd like you to imagine that the child is reading like that, and you ask these children to read out loud. And after that, we ask them some questions. Usual process after reading, we ask them questions. So what is our strategy? We try to focus on the word itself. We do not think about context. We try to identify the letters, the words, and the sentences. And after that, the teacher usually asks questions about the text. So you see that if it is really possible to get information from the text, what we do really need is extra time to be able to read this text. And then sometimes children with dyslexia do not have any extra time, and it's very demotivating for them, and their self-esteem goes down. And now, as I said, we will talk about who can diagnose and when it usually happens. So generally speaking, you can go to an experienced speech therapist or a neurologist and have a child diagnosed. It's good evaluation testing, but it's not enough for school if we talk about inclusive education. In Ukraine, there are a lot of centers. They are called Regional Information Resource Centers. In Ukrainian, this is IRC. In any district in Kiev, okay, I'm talking about Kiev because I know. In any district, they have these centers. And they have official procedure of examination, evaluation, and testing. It includes intellectual testing and achievement testing, as well as assessment of all the underlying language skills which are related to dyslexia. So usually there are at least 4 people, 4 specialists. It's a speech therapist, is a psychologist, it's a teacher, and a defectologist. So this examination takes about 1 hour and a half. It's a really difficult process with the parents. Parents are present when it's happened, and then after that you get a report from this commission, which can confirm child's dyslexia, and you take it and you go to school, and then you may ask the administration for inclusive education. So this report is very detailed. For example, we had my last time my son was diagnosed a couple of months ago, and I got the report, 6 pages, very detailed report with detailed recommendations. For example, if a child needs assistant in the class or not, how to assess these children, how to help, how to accommodate. So different forms of advice and strategies how to work with these people. So again, in every district, we have this commission. It's free for families. And if parents of students in your classes ask, so then you can recommend them to call these centers and have a child diagnosed. Okay, so what are the signs of dyslexia? So this list of signs can be interesting for all teachers, not only for English teachers, because some signs are general, not for all dyslexic people, and some of them can be noticed by teachers of foreign language. So dyslexic difficulties can have, as I already said, different degrees of severity. And of course, they change during life, during people's life. The most prevalent, of course, sign of dyslexia is problem with reading, but it's not limited to literacy-related problems. But reading, writing is a main problem, as I said. So if we talk about English, what's the main problem that children with dyslexia, or all students, not only children with dyslexia, have? First, it's reduced phonological processing. So difficulty in learning, in remembering, and distinguishing the sounds. So the sounds, especially those sounds which do not exist in their first native language, in their L1. Then the second, difficulty in speed and accuracy of processing oral information. So when we speak, it's very difficult to get what you said. Or if it's a listening task, it's very difficult. They do not have enough time in the brain to process this information. They need to listen more times than other children need. Sound and letter relation is a difficulty in recognizing spoken words in writing. So even if they know a word and then they read this word, it doesn't mean they can remember and recognize this word. English is famous. I mean, it's very difficult to read English because different sounds, different letters, sometimes they do not relate to each other. And to tell the truth, English is not the best language for dyslexic students to study as a foreign language. I mean, some scientists, people say that Italian is a perfect language for students to study as a foreign language. Different types of problems which also have dyslexic students is memorizing new words. It's very difficult for them because they have problems with memory. To understand and to use new structures, grammar structures, any different rules, any concepts, for example, how to make plural forms, how to compare things, how to make a correct order in the sentence. And also it's very difficult to organize their thoughts in a longer written text. Now let's go to actually more practical strategies, what to do with reading and writing and how to support students with dyslexia. So first things, there are a couple of questions and we are going to discuss them. How to choose reading texts. So rule number 1, and without it, it's actually impossible to make students read. The text must be interesting. Must be interesting for appropriate level, for appropriate age. It must be interesting, and what we do really need to do is we need to make our students read. How to do that? The key thing, which is really helpful, very easy to do, and it's really very helpful. When you make a test, I'm sorry, not test, text for reading task, we start with the easiest paragraph. So even if it's a weak student, even if it's a beginner, we start the first paragraphs, the first sentences in the text must be really easy. Because if it is difficult, it will stop students, they will just give up. They won't keep reading. But the understanding of at least a couple of sentences gives students some understanding that they can do it. It motivates them. It supports them. So if you make or prepare the text yourself, please start with simple, very simple paragraphs, always. So does it mean that reading text should be always short? Of course not. At lower levels, students will only be able to cope with small and easy text, but when they become more advanced, you will need to introduce longer texts, of course. How to help students to cope with this text? We always divide text into sections. I don't mean only paragraphs, but sections. And also, it's very helpful to give some headings to these paragraphs, to these sections, in order to help our students to navigate the text. Even if they don't have enough time to read all the text, these helpful headings will help to understand what the paragraph is about. And usually in the post-reading tasks, we have true false sentences or just multiple choice questions. It will be easier for them to find in the text where the answer is. So again, divide your text into paragraphs. Next point, it's about new vocabulary in the text. Usually, the text should have about 5-6% of words, new words, but they shouldn't stop students from understanding the text. With dyslexic students, it works in a little bit different way. They do not understand the words from the context. Sometimes they just do not absolutely understand the sentence, even if they don't know only one word. They can't guess the meaning of the word if it's a very clear context, unfortunately. So what can we do? We should help them with new vocabulary. You can do it in different ways. You can use pictures. You can use glossaries. You can even translate for these specific students. It's okay to translate some words. In other ways, you can just change a new or difficult words into their synonyms, which you know that your student know. It's a reading task. It's not a task to learn new vocabulary. If you check reading skill, so you may use a lot of easy words, and it doesn't stop students from learning reading. If we study vocabulary, so this is a little bit different. The same about grammar. The text doesn't have to include a lot of new and complicated grammar structures. And actually about grammar, we are not talking today a lot about grammar. For example, passive, for some reason, is very difficult for dyslexic students. When they see passive in the sentence, they don't know what is happening actually in the sentence. What about appearance of the text? So usually I use 13, 14 point of font. It should be very clear. I'd recommend not to use double columns, you know, like in newspaper. It's very difficult to read in columns. We do not underline all the text. If the text is underlined, I mean all the text is underlined, it looks very endless. Also, we don't use italics. If you need to highlight some words or sentences or phrases, you can just make it bold or highlight in different colors. So choose different way how to highlight it instead of underlining and making it italics. Some people, some teachers say that students, dyslexic students, find text easier to read if it is printed not on a white paper. Personally, I don't see any difference, but if it works, try. Maybe it will work with your students. Why not? And the last point about reading, which I'd really recommend that you try. It's very easy to do and costs nothing. Usually, when we work with our textbooks, with students' books, if we have a listening text, we have a recording for that, of course. For reading texts, for reading tasks, we never have recordings. So what you can do, you can record the reading for your students. And I don't mean for working in the class, for the home task. At home, when a child or student doesn't have any pressure, they can listen to this text as many times as they need, with clear pronunciation, with clear intonation. It's really very helpful for these people to practice reading. They can do it, listen and read at the same time. And it really helps to increase their level of reading. So that is very, very useful. Okay. Also, I promised to tell about some famous reading and reading programs, but programs are mainly used for native language, not for foreign language. I just wanted to mention them, which are popular and very widespread in the USA. And these names of programs that you see on your screens are really effective. And it's already proved that they work. And I'd like to talk about Orton Gillingham approach program, named after authors of these two authors of this program, as well actually as Barton or Wilson. So these programs, they were designed to help students with dyslexia and with other learning difficulties. So what is the main point of this program? I mean, I'm talking about number one, Orton Gillingham. So they use, and this program is the first program which started multisensory approach in teaching reading, writing, and spelling. We'll talk about, I will show some pictures how multisensory approach works, and also how I use it in my lessons. So this multisensory approach helps in reading, writing, spelling, with different skills which are related to dyslexia. What it means, well, multisensory, because instructors use different senses. They use sight, hearing, touching, and movement to help students connect language with letters and words. Different ways how it can be used. I will show you some pictures, but first I'd like to tell you how it works. So first, the first step is usually to assess students in their reading skills different areas of language to find out their strong areas, weak areas. So a very good examination first goes. And then they have a specific order in their program. And first, the group may start working with phonological awareness. This is a problem, typical problem for dyslexic students. So it means how to make connection between sound and the letter. And the next step that would be recognizing these sounds in the words. So usually, not usually, always, the student must master each skill before they move on to another one. So if the student has problems, if the instructor thinks that it's not, teaching wasn't enough, they started from the beginning and they work with individual sounds and individual letters from the beginning, because the goal of the program is for this student to use these skills they have learned to decode words independently. So again, it's usually used for native language, but I have taken a lot of ideas and I use them at my lessons. So let's talk about multisensory approach and how it helps to teach spelling. So multisensory approach means that we engage more than one sense at time. So we use sight, hearing, touching when child or student teaches, no, when we teach students to read, to write, to calculate different aspects of learning differences. Let's have a look at some of them. There are some examples. This is how to use send when to work with children. So what do children do? When they work with sand, they spread out the sand on the tray or table anywhere, and then they use their fingers to write the letters or maybe syllables or maybe later words. As they write, they always say the sound each letter makes. So then they blend actually these sounds together and read the word. So as teacher says it, then they pronounce. So 3 senses at a time. Another way, it's very actually nice. I have in my class trays with different colors. Sand, students like working with them very much, but it can be messy a bit, but it's okay. Next, number 2, it's air writing. We call it air writing or sky writing. These writing practices and actually writing and spelling through muscle memory. So when we write in the air, we train our memory. We start writing in the air from very big letters. Every time we make them smaller, smaller, smaller. And in the end, we pronounce them. We always say what we are writing. And then the final step is to write down in the copybooks the letter or word or sentence, whatever you are practicing. So they first skywrite and then they write it in their copybooks. And all the time they pronounce the words. Next, what is called sandpaper. So letters that are cut out of sandpaper can help kids retain like a tactile or touch memory of letters and their sounds. So students trace each letter with their fingers. They say the sound each letter makes. They also can do it with their eyes closed. It's a very good practice, again, to touch, to feel, then to say. First, they listen to the instruction, then they do that with their fingers, And then they say, and in the end, again, they write this letter in their copybook. One more idea, which is very nice, also represented by Orton Gillingham reading program. So what we can do, we need 3 boxes with your target language, with your target word. In our case, it's a cat. So what we do, we first, the first step, the child reads the word, then they build this word with tails or magnets or whatever you have and use in your classes, and in the end they write again the word which they have just practiced. So we do it as many times as we need in order to help students remember target language. I have this example, say paper laminated, children write with markers, then I can wipe it, so then and use every lesson again and again. One more interesting point that Wilson reading program represents this idea. It's called tapping out sounds. So for example, if we practice again the word cat, so what children do, the children break down the words into sounds. So first they tap it with their fingers, their index finger with thumb, and say k. Then middle finger with thumb short and ring finger with thumb t. So it looks like k, t. And then, so one touch, one sound. And we practice in order to help them identify and distinguish sounds each letter makes. We do it a couple of times, and after that, again, write down in our copybooks or in their copybooks. What about vocabulary? Vocabulary teaching, some ideas, some pieces of advice as to how to teach students vocabulary. So you see the main rules. Number 1, it's important to limit the number of new words that you introduce in your lesson. So up to 7, I should say 6, 7, maximum 8. If you have a set of vocabulary which has a bigger number of words, so just focus on some more important for these students. So do not overwhelm students with information about new words. What I mean is the main thing which we teach is meaning, of course, of a new word and pronunciation. Pronunciation is always as important as the meaning of the word, because later when they hear this new word, they should be able to identify this word. For in more advanced classes, then we give some collocations with new words, but only after students have learned meaning and pronunciation of the word. To teach the words in context, it means that we don't give separate words, we give them phrases. It's easier to study new vocabulary in phrases or even short sentences. Students with dyslexia need a lot of practice. Comparing with people without dyslexia, they should practice a new word in different ways about 100 times. Doesn't mean that they should read the word 100 times or write down the word 100 times. In all these multisensory ways, skywrite, maybe make with glue or plasticine, or skywriting in the sandpaper. Anyways, different games, different flashcards, different ways we often mime, then guess. So a lot of Practice. I'm sure you have a lot of ideas and games how to study, which help you with your students to learn new vocabulary. Then, accommodating dyslexic learners. Uh, After you have heard all this information, it may seem that it's a huge challenge to accommodate dyslexic students in the class. In fact, I'd like to share with you some ideas which are not expensive, which you can use every day in your classes. And it's important to remember that if you prepare something for a dyslexic student, it will be very beneficial for all the class. Always, whatever you do, it's very good for all children. So you don't need to prepare this task personally for a dyslexic student. You can do it with all your class. And accommodations, which I'm going to talk about, shouldn't provide any unfair advantage for dyslexic students. Some parents sometimes say that if my son has, for example, assistant in the class, so it's not really fair according to other students who do not have any people who help them complete the task. I don't agree with that. It's a necessary accommodating, without which it's not possible for learners with dyslexia to complete the same assignment as other learners. So there are some ideas for classroom management. You can see that on your screens. So the main point that always should remember, it's extra time. Because any test for any dyslexic student is stressful. And whatever you do, any task you complete or they complete, they need extra time. Next point, I'd recommend that you provide the questions and issues that you want to discuss with your dyslexic students in the lesson in advance. Again, it doesn't mean that you need to inform them much time before, but if it's about 5 or 10 minutes before the lesson, if you give them the sentences that you'd like to discuss, it will be very useful or helpful for them, because if the student is not ready for the lesson, usually 5 minutes won't help. But if they are ready, these 5 minutes will be very helpful because they have some time to revise, to repeat information again and again, some paragraphs. So that will be really helpful. Okay. And again, we never compare the results of our students with other students. Always try to compare their results with their personal results, which they have already achieved before. So how you can help? What are these ideas and strategies? The main point is copying from the blackboard or from the board. Every time when students copy information from the board, they are focused only on what they are writing. But we as teachers, very often, we write on the board, we explain some material at the same time, simultaneously. Dyslexic students can't focus on copying and on listening at the same time. So what we can do is to prepare handouts with some key information, with some important questions, important information on handouts, and give them before the lesson. Then when you are explaining, the student can listen to you instead of copying all the rules, examples from the board. So that's very helpful. Another point also, usually books have a lot of tasks on one page, a lot of pictures, a lot of sometimes not appropriate pictures or rules or whatever, and students get distracted. So what we can do is just to cover the text, which you don't need, with some pages, paper, and make a small, like a window in the book, and all unnecessary information will be closed. So that it really also that it really works. Also, what kind of support can you propose? Let your students record your lessons. Some teachers do not let their students record the lessons, but I do. Then at home again, they can listen to the lesson. They can try to understand it again if there is some information that is left without, like they didn't understand it. I let my students use spell checkers, different devices, so some assistance that they really do need. It's not a preference, it's not an advantage, just they physically need this help, without which they can't just complete the assignment or a test. Another very important type of support that you can provide is time. Time which you spend with your dyslexic students. They are often very demotivated. You need to motivate, to support, and to encourage them. And for that, they need some time which they spend personally with you, or with some assistant, or with other trained tutors, in a group work, in individual work, different type of work, but they need some time to prepare for the lesson and in order to understand program or rules or whatever they need. So again, let your students record, use different electronic devices, and these all factors are very helpful. They are very not so important for us and not difficult for us, but for dyslexic students, they really make difference. I try all these strategies at my lessons. I checked them. I know that they are really helpful. And just to have some information about our course, we have 2 groups in Great Education Center, for different ages, for different levels. We practice all this multi-sensory approach, and so if you have students with dyslexia who may need some specific type of learning, we will be happy to help your students, so they are welcome in our school. One more task about assessment. It's a very interesting and at the same time difficult question, because in Ukraine we don't have any official documents that provide any rules as to how to assess students with dyslexia. So in the resource center, which I mentioned before, you will be given a report with some recommendations as to how to assess these children, but usually administration of the school with teachers, they decide themselves how to do that. If we talk about testing and assessment, what you can do when you test your students. I already mentioned some of these points very briefly. Let's talk about them again. So any test is stressful. Any test which has a lot of reading is even more stressful. So if it is possible, give them extra time. Give them up to 15% more time to finish their test. Next, never check different skills in one task. So if you check a reading task, don't make your students listen to text for for a long time. If you check writing, again, don't make them read a long question. If it's a reading, if it's a listening task, so just make the answers very short and brief, so they can read and understand them very, very easy. When you, if it is not, for example, the NO exam, official exam, where we unfortunately do not have any preferences for students, if it's a test at school, so you can actually decide yourself which support or accommodation is appropriate, which is not. And I'm sure if it's just a test, any type of work, you can provide some accommodation for your students and can change a test a little bit for them. If it is NO, unfortunately, there are still no programs for dyslexic students or for students with any disability, any learning problems. Now I'd like to mention that one important part of our Great Education Center is a teacher training center, where actually you have opportunity to learn, to study how to learn with students of different ages, and actually with people with learning disabilities as well. So at Great Education Center, we run CELTA and Delta courses, also CELT-P, which is for teachers of primary school, CELT-S for secondary school, TKT preparation. We are the biggest center for CELTA in Ukraine, and we run about 10 CELTA courses a year. And hundreds of teachers got their certificate in our school. And one more point, as you may know, that teachers now can take CELT-P, CELT-S and TKT preparation courses and have them qualified as official hours of their professional development. We have all information on our site. So if you are interested, so please choose the course and develop professionally with us. So, and one more point, which I promised to talk about, it's a Cambridge Assessment English. Unfortunately, as I said, we don't have any arrangement in Ukraine. And students with dyslexia do not have any extra time, any breaks, and it makes it much more difficult for them to have this test, to take the test. But Cambridge Assessment English, they have a lot of different forms of arrangements, which we will talk just in a second. So let me check. I have a question. Can a child be dyslexic in English while in Ukrainian he, she, or can read? Well, the child can be either dyslexic or not. It can't be that he has dyslexia only in one language. No, the type of dyslexia can be different. And he can read well in native language and have problems with another languages. Also, there are different forms of dyslexia. Some people can read well, but they, for example, do not understand what they read about. Other people struggle with technically reading. I mean, they technically read badly, but they can understand and remember what they read about. So if you think that a child has dyslexia, have problems only in English, so it may be not dyslexia, maybe they just need their special program or a little bit different group, or just some changes in process of learning, I mean. So it can't be dyslexia only in one language. Okay, so if you are going to take official Cambridge exam, so then we have to, we are talking about 10 minutes about Cambridge exams. They have prepared a lot of different areas, so which are really helpful, which can help you to take and pass your test successfully. So if you are or your students going to take Cambridge, any exam, Cambridge exam, so what you need to do is to apply as soon as possible through your Cambridge center, exam center. It's not a rule, but very often they ask you to provide a medical certificate. So what do you need? What can you do? What advantages do you have if you are passing Cambridge exam? Any Cambridge, from young learners to CPE. So first, it's extra time. Always we start talking about some changes, yes, with extra time. So when you need extra time, you normally ask for about 25%. You can actually ask for more, but you need to discuss it with your teacher and with your English center. So next, in which parts can you have extra time in English Cambridge exams? So you may have extra time during listening when you will have your special supervisor who will stop CD before listening to give you extra time to read, during listening to give you extra time to write, and after listening actually to give you some time to check your answers. It's very actually interesting and nice because students usually struggle a lot when they work. Next, some breaks. You may also ask for breaks with extra time or instead of extra time, but you may ask for both. Yeah, you may ask for extra breaks and you may spend this time in another room alone, but you just need to understand that you will be supervised during students with dyslexia need some time off to relax, maybe to close their eyes. And then after this break, they start working again. Next, using a computer. You can ask for permission to write your answers using a computer or word processor. So very important to remember that you must not use spell checkers. It's obvious. Any grammar check. So if your center doesn't have equipment, so for example, some computer, so you may actually, you may be able to use your computer, but again, without any spell checking and spell check or different grammar check. Students with dyslexia have test in a special room, in a separate room, and you must write your answers individually. We have a question, what should I do as a teacher if I think the child is dyslexic? Very good question. You need to talk to your to parents of this child and recommend them to go to resource center and have a child diagnosed, tested. So first they can go to just speech therapist. Not all speech therapists can work with dyslexic students, but they can identify if the child has dyslexia or not, and then send them to a special commission to have this child tested. Let's come back to our tests, English tests. So again, you students write and take this test in another room, in a special room, but very important that they can't ask someone to write answers instead of them. And they also can't use any software, any recognition software when they have a test. Next, they can't ask someone to read questions instead of them. They must read questions individually. Have a copy here. Another point, if their handwriting is really difficult to read, sometimes people with dyslexia have problems with handwriting, they may ask to copy their answers. In this point after the exam, they will dictate every letter, every punctuation mark, any comma, and so on, for the person who can type and who can write the text instead of them, but with all mistakes, with all absolutely 100% of copy, all grammar, spelling mistakes, all mistakes. But if the handwriting is so poor that it can't be read and checked, so yes, the center should provide a person who will exact copy your answers. Next, filling in the answers. So in most Cambridge exam papers, students have to copy or kind of transfer the answers to the answer sheet, which then is scanned by a computer. If it's difficult to follow the numbers or questions on the page, students with dyslexia may be allowed to write their answers on a separate piece of paper, or sometimes directly on question paper, but ask your center for advice. Another point, transparent colored overlays. Students with dyslexia can ask permission to use transparent colors overlays. If they use it in everyday life, it's like different. Sometimes it's pink, sometimes it's yellow. They put it on the text and it's easier for them to read the text. Also, people may ask for enlarged copies of exam papers. These copies are called modified large prints paper, and this question, the question paper with tasks is modified. Sometimes some frames around the task, they have frames, they are removed. So just they have a text, tasks on white paper without any distracting texts. Okay, when we say other equipment, we mean that the exam center, if you want, can let you use other type of equipment. For example, a screen magnifier, you know, this like glass, which makes the text bigger. So you also can use it in the exam. So as you see, a lot of changes, a lot of things that Cambridge Assessment English provides for people with different learning disabilities, and actually very useful, not only for dyslexia. They have for blind people, they have for deaf people, they have for people with different problems. They have a lot of helping, a lot of assistance. They provide a lot of assistance. Okay. And before we finish, I'd like to tell you that Great Education Center has a status of Platinum Center, and it's the largest exam center in Ukraine. We provide students with all these exams that I have been talking about, and more than 4,600 candidates take different exams in our center. So you or your students can take any Cambridge exam in our center, and we have more than 100 partners all over Ukraine. And we offer you to become our partner. So we travel around Ukraine, delivering and organizing exams on the premises of our partners. We support them. We provide opportunities for professional development. So if you are interested, you can follow the link on the screen, and we will be happy to see your school as a great exam partner. So actually this is it that I wanted to share with you. Now, if you have questions, I will be happy to answer them. This is my name again and email address on your screens. Feel free to contact me in Facebook. You may send me any messages. I will be happy to share with you. Please, I'm still here, so I will look through the comments. Maybe I have missed something. So how incorporate accommodation for students with dyslexia into regular class with course books, with text as their extra time? Yeah, it's a very good question, how to provide this assistance for students with dyslexia in the class, especially if we have big groups of students. So you can prepare text, for example, if it is a reading text, you may prepare that before the lesson, make some changes, for example, synonyms or that we have discussed, and give this text during the lesson. So I practiced it with students with dyslexia in regular classes. I prepared the same text with some, so I adapted in some way, and students worked with the same class, but with a little bit different text. Is there no extra time for students? So it's up to you. You can ask your students to stay after the lessons and give extra time to complete the task. Should we use the same tips both for children and adults? Yes, of course. We have absolutely the same strategies. We work with the same patterns, the same program. Usually adults are a little bit more hardworking, just because they need it, they understand they need English for different reasons. Students, young learners are usually reluctant to study English. Their parents make them do that. Well, as a rule, maybe not always. It's actually a bit easier to work with older students. Even I have a group with 8, 9 years and 12, 13. It's a big difference because older students are it's easier to motivate them. Can a dyslexic child have only problems with memorizing number facts? Well, not. As it's only one sign of dyslexia, so no, it's not dyslexia. It may be some other problem, but it's not dyslexia. Dyslexic, it's about reading, spelling, and understanding. Memorizing and analyzing information, it's point number 2. So they can't have problems only with memorizing number facts. So if they have problems and troubles with numbers, so try to adapt all the strategies which I have just talked about, but according to numbers. So some associations, some different strategies which are really helpful for them to remember numbers. So the same strategies. Any other questions? Okay, so thank you very much for your attention, for your questions. We have a recording of this seminar. Actually, the seminar is recorded, of course, and we will, I think, put it there in our Facebook profile. So then, yes, there will be the recording of this webinar, of course. Okay, thank you very much for your questions and that you were with us. I'm sorry again for some problems that we had at the beginning. Okay, so I hope to see you in our next webinars. Be welcome. You're welcome to contact me. Find my profile on Facebook and let's stay in touch. Goodbye, everyone.